Chapter 5 Sustenance.
You've gotta see this, sir.
Zuko jolts at both the voice and the title. No one ever calls him Sir. Not without copious amounts of sarcasm, at least.
What?
Even to his own ears, his voice sounds harsh. He makes no effort to correct himself. There are more important things to worry about than whatever odd sight Hideo wants to drag him off to. Things like the gnawing emptiness in his stomach and the nearly depleted supplies left in his trunk. Things like the fact that he's only slept a few hours since he arrived. He can't quite bring himself to regret any of it. In the hours he's sat awake, he's managed to work out his next steps toward repairing the village. And he certainly can't regret giving most of his provisions away to the newly recovered children. The only trouble is that he doesn't know how much longer he can keep working with so little food left. Fish. Hideo leans down close and whispers like it's some grand, mysterious secret. A whole fucking heap of fish. Zuko jerks away from the old man's sour breath.
What?
He repeats, incredulous. What's so strange about fish? Unless someone has managed to catch enough fish to keep the people fed until supplies arrived from Shujing, Zuko could hardly care less.
Clean the mud out of your ears, Just Lee. I said you had to see it.
With a groan, Zuko stands. This sounds like a waste of time. He's tired and hungry, and he ought to be focusing on what he can do to keep Shusoku afloat until help arrives. He ought to be making more repairs and organizing groups of villagers to search the forests for ash bananas and wild tomato carrots. But it seems that Hideo will not be dissuaded, and Zuko doesn't have the energy to argue.
Fine. Just make it quick.
Hideo fixes him with a glare, but motions for Zuko to follow. Reluctantly, he obeys. Maybe he'll be lucky. Maybe there really is something worthwhile out there. Though Hideo is undoubtedly exaggerating, a few fresh-caught fish would make a difference. If there's enough food to keep the children from falling back into illness, then Zuko will be satisfied. He refuses to believe it until he investigates for himself. The village is livelier than he can ever remember it being, and just like yesterday, Zuko sees more faces he recognizes on the street, more people who he knows were too sick or injured to leave their beds just yesterday. It still sends uneasy tingling across his back to think of the unnatural recoveries, but he sets his jaw and marches after Hideo. He can think about that later. For now, he presses his way through the increasingly dense crowd until he reaches the front. At the sight of it, he stops so suddenly that he almost jumps backward. Hideo isn't exaggerating. An assortment of muddy brown and dull silver-colored fish lie in a heap in the middle of the path, stacked nearly up to his waist and sprawling over more than half the street. There's a faint, muddy smell on the air, but the fish themselves hardly smell at all. They must be fresh. Even the eyes have barely begun to glaze over. Zuko looks around to all the assembled villagers, and they stare back, just as baffled as him. A whole fucking heap of fish just lying in the middle of the street. How on earth? He rubs his forehead with the heel of his hand. It isn't that he's never seen so many fish before. Of course he has, plenty of times, at sea and in coastal market towns, but Shusoku is neither. The river is nearly a mile off, too far away for the fish to have ended up here by accident. Too far for anyone to have ventured there and back since sunrise. Too far for anyone to have hauled so many fish back, even if it were possible to catch this many. It almost looks like a fisherman's cart overturned, spilling its contents across the street, except that there are no wheel ruts left in the ground, nor any grooves or dents a cart might have left when it overturned. In fact, Aside from the fish themselves, the only unusual thing Zuko can see is a broad, darkened ring of sodden earth. A bit of water makes sense, but if he squints, he thinks he can make out narrow, smooth whorls carved into the ground, almost as though there was so much water that it etched rivulets into the path when it escaped. That should be impossible. It would take an enormous amount of water to soak so much of the ground, to say nothing about smoothing away the old ruts in the pathway. No one who was already trying to move such an enormous number of fish would carry water with them, too. Not unless...
Told you that you had to see it.
Zuko jumps and turns back to face Hideo.
Don't sneak up on me.
His scowl only holds for a few seconds before confusion overtakes him again and he turns back to the pile of fish.
How did these get here?
Hideo shrugs.
We all thought it was you. What? Why? How would I even? Anyone with eyes can see that you don't sleep. How are we supposed to know what kind of crazy shit you get up to all night?
Zuko scowls. He has been sleeping. Not much. Certainly not enough, but he's slept an hour or two every night since his arrival. He probably sleeps better here than he did at the palace, simply because he works until he's ready to drop, and because there's no longer any danger of Azula sneaking up on him. Even the scratchy, smelling sleeping mat doesn't bother him too much anymore.
I don't wander around making piles of fish, he retorts. Is there anyone here who could have done this? Any crazy fishermen or anything? If we had someone who could get us this much food overnight, don't you think we'd have asked them instead of starving until we had no choice but to write to the capital?
A pause.
No offense meant.
Zuko ignores that. He can barely consider himself a product of the capital anymore. Not after 3 years at sea, months as a fugitive, and now this. It doesn't particularly matter whether the old man means to insult him or not.
Let me get this straight, he says, pinching the bridge of his nose. You have no idea where the fish came from, but you're still going to eat them. You want us to leave them to rot instead?
Zuko starts to protest. He knows how badly the village needs food. It's been weighing heavy on his mind since he arrived, but this seems dangerous. It isn't normal for heaps of fish to appear out of nowhere. And maybe it's just because he spent too much of his life in contact with his own family, but he's never known such a grand gesture to come without costs. He wants to believe that it's a kindness. That someone out there somewhere saw the people struggling and brought them food. It will be a better world if it's true. If the fish are safe, then the village will be fed until help arrives from Shujing. Longer, even. And if the village is fed, then Zuko can focus his efforts on other things. He can start making this place livable again. But there is still an edge of doubt in the back of his mind. It's too much. It's too strange. He thinks back to yesterday, to watching in disbelief as the first of the villagers emerged from their houses, so much stronger, so much healthier than before. Someone must have done that. Someone must have healed the people in the night, and someone must have brought the fish here, and maybe... There's a flash of clarity, and an idea begins to take shape in his mind.
We'll have the old people try it out first,
Hideo says, shattering the thought before it can form.
We'll know if there's anything wrong with the fish before the whole town gets themselves sick. We can't force them to. Kid, we all volunteered. Take it easy.
Oh. His shoulders deflate a little. He still doesn't like the idea of any of the villagers acting as poison testers, but he's seen enough of the world to know its cruelty. Right now, caution is necessary. Zuko nods.
Then the sooner you can start, the better.
After Hideo selects a few of the fish and trots off toward the square, Zuko stands still for a moment. The fish ought to be moved out of the sun, he realizes. moved and cleaned and smoked so that they keep as long as possible. The food will do them no good if it spoils within a day or two. It surprises him when he begins to work and several of the bystanders join in immediately, scooping up the slippery, scaly fish by the armload and loading them into carts while a few others run off to start the fires. The villagers who stay seem to actually listen to Zuko and appreciate what little help and direction he is able to offer. He isn't used to this. He isn't used to being appreciated. He tries not to get used to it. When he first arrived here, the people didn't trust him. If he dares to take this newfound trust for granted, he will lose it. It's happened before. He'll do whatever he can to keep it from happening again. Zuko loses himself in the motions, walking in short spurts from the fish pile to the carts, then from the carts to the smoking racks. He almost forgets the suspicious rivulets carved into the path, the evidence of the person who must have been visiting Shusoku in the middle of the night. He starts to remember the reason why he trained so hard during his banishment. With enough work to occupy his mind, he can drive almost anything from his thoughts. He nearly succeeds. By midday, he is tired and sweating, but the old people have eaten, most of the fish are cleaned, and Zuko is nearly done hauling firewood to the square. But before he can go back for his final armload, Tomoe clears her throat behind him. Zuko turns to face her, and his eyes are immediately drawn to the pristine, gold-trimmed scroll in her hands. "I'd say that this is for you, sir, but the name..." His face heats when he sees it. To Prince Zuko, written in Azula's unmistakable, meticulous hand. I don't... Tomoe dangles the scroll. "Something you forgot to mention to us, He's gotten used to being called Lee. So used to it that he's nearly forgotten the possibility that the people here might learn the truth. He has forgotten the possibility that Azula might still try to communicate with him. He's begun to think of this place as his home, or something near to it at least. This is his life now, and it bothers him less than he ever could have guessed. He feels a little sick. He should tell the truth. He probably should have told the truth from the very beginning, but it's far too easy to gloss over who he really is. He doesn't feel like royalty anymore, and he doesn't think he wants to be known as royalty out here either. It isn't just that the people will hate him for it, though he does think briefly about the armor stashed away in his little shack, hidden beneath the rest of his supplies so they might forget where he's from. It isn't just that he's traded the safety of armor for the safety of anonymity. "Why?" Tomoe demands, amber-colored eyes piercing through him. "Because why should I claim them when they've been looking for an excuse to throw me away ever since I was born?" It bursts out of him before he has a chance to think, but once it's out, he can't quite bring himself to regret it. Mother and uncle were the only two who ever cared for him, and now that they're both gone, there is nothing to keep Zuko tied to his family. He is adrift, and through the bitter sting of it, he thinks he might like things better this way. Tomoe stares at him, and Zuko holds her gaze for only an instant before he pulls away again. He has firewood to carry, and once he's through with that, there are villagers to check on, repairs to be made, 100 things he can busy himself with until nightfall. 100 ways to prove that whatever else he may be, Zuko is useful. But before he makes it more than 2 steps, the scroll jabs him in the center of the back, and he whirls back around. "Take the letter, Lee." She holds it out to him, her expression pure stone. "Read it before someone thinks that you stole it." Zuko feels his brow furrow as he looks down at the impeccable script again. It's clear enough by Tomoe's voice that she doesn't quite trust him. That she'll be watching him closely for even the smallest misstep, but she hasn't called any attention to them yet. This feels like an offering of some kind. Though he isn't sure he wants to see what Azula has to say, He takes the letter and marches off toward his little shack. The ridges of the wax seal soften and begin to melt, taking the shape of his hand as he grips the scroll tighter and tighter. This is new. He's never felt such a strong desire to burn a letter from his own family without so much as opening it. But he lets the door swing shut behind him and grudgingly breaks the sticky, half-melted seal. My free time around the palace has become terribly dull without you here, Zuzu. Who would have ever thought that I'd get so accustomed to having you around in just a few weeks? I suppose it's fortunate that I have so little spare time now. Father expects me to attend most of his meetings, and they can fill a day very quickly. Don't be too disappointed if he doesn't write, by the way. He's far too busy for correspondence. I'm sure you understand that. Zuko understands perfectly well. Not once in the 3 years of his banishment did Father ever find the time to write. Why would he start now? In fact, I am very short on time as well. But since I am a kind and considerate sister, I had to let you know that the little problem we discussed before your departure is being dealt with. I can't possibly understate the difficulty I went through to get everything sorted, but you can rest easy now. I've done you the greatest favor anyone will ever do. Don't rush yourself trying to repay me. I'd much rather you take your time and make it worth my while. It takes a moment before Zuko realizes what favor Azula is talking about. He hasn't thought about the Avatar in days. He hasn't had time to. Zuko twists the letter up into a tight, crumpled wad and stares at it as his bending takes over and reduces it to ash. He can't afford to think about the Avatar, or about what Azula might have done to the child. He can't give in to his weaker side, and for once, it isn't because he'll be torn limb from limb at the first sign of vulnerability. Out here, practically no one knows him, and no one cares if he's weak. Out here, the only thing that matters is whether he can keep moving. And if he lingers too long on what Azula might have done to the Avatar, he might not be able to do that. His mind returns to those little streams cut into the earth around the pile of fish, to the amount of water it would have taken to produce that effect, to the extremely limited number of people who could have done something like that. Maybe he can focus his attention on the mysterious nighttime wanderer instead. By the light of day, she likes the journey to the village far more than she remembers. After several nights of only venturing out after dark, of creeping through the trees alone and barely able to see, she is finally able to shake off the feeling that she is being watched in the forest. It's just silly paranoia, she tells herself. In the daylight, she can see all the places where the most frightening shadows hid by night. She can see that the mass of darkness between two crooked trees was nothing more than a thorny bush, and that the small cave along her path, ominous in the dark, is empty. It comes as a relief. Though she never had the intention to stop her nightly visits, the darkened forest has grown more frightening with every journey she's taken through it. Knowing that there is nothing to fear helps to set her stomach at ease. But that's only an inadvertent benefit of her daytime visit. Her real purpose is to find out what else is going on in the village, to find out who else is helping the people there. Maybe if she knows, she can find a way to thank them in secret. Maybe, if she can figure out her counterpart's plan, she can work in parallel with them in some sort of silent cooperation. In the absence of anyone she can talk to, helping the village has become her best outlet, and having an ally, even one she never sees or speaks to, will be even better. When she arrives, the village is busier than she expects. People hurry from one house to the next, moving supplies and tools while others lug armloads of firewood toward the center of town. She doesn't have to feign surprise at the sight of it. She is surprised. In the daylight, the difference in the village is more dramatic than she expects. The debris has been cleared from the paths, and though the makeshift repairs look no more substantial than they did by Starlight, The cloths covering the holes in the walls and roofs are vibrant and colorful. It looks hopeful, even more so than it did last night. Better still, the people are moving, working to bring their village back to life. Katara may have given them a push, and her counterpart working in the daytime is certainly helping too, but the people are fighting for themselves. Ultimately, their survival is in their own hands, and as far as she can see, they are grasping for it with everything they have. Katara does her best to look lost as she meanders the path toward the house with the crooked door, the one that is always illuminated when she arrives. She may never have a better opportunity to learn who has been working alongside her. But when she is still several streets away, the villagers begin to notice her. She can hardly be surprised. Newcomers are probably rare out here. Still, her shoulders stiffen a little as she walks. If they're all watching her, she can't get close enough to peer through the windows. If she's going to attract attention, she can't investigate the way she would like. She makes it another few steps farther before a voice stops her. "You again?" Katara turns around to find the tall woman who sold her the cooking pot watching suspiciously from the middle of the street. She does her best to smile. "It's nice to see you again, too." The woman is unimpressed and slings her bundle of tarps over her shoulder. Looking past the woman, Katara can see the blank spaces left behind where the cloths used to cover broken patches on the houses, and a small cluster of villagers closing in with tools and short planks of wood to fix in their places. "I didn't say that it was nice." The woman starts walking toward the center of town and motions for Katara to follow. No. Katara doesn't want to be led away. She has to know who lives in the house with the crooked door. "Come for more cooking pots?" Katara catches up in a few quick strides, then shakes her head. "Not this time." She pretends to be enthralled by a roof draped with cloth. "It looks much nicer here than a few days ago. You must have all been working hard." A grunt. "You could say that. If you're not here for more cooking pots, then why are you back here? You saw last time that we didn't have anything to spare." They do now. Katara made very sure of that last night, but she wouldn't ask them to give up any of their food. Not when she had to take so many fish at one time. It will take a few weeks for that section of the river to replenish itself. "I was wondering if you had any way of sending a message," she answers. It's the best option she can think of without incriminating herself. She can write a letter full of nonsense and send it off to someone who doesn't exist, and she'll neither deprive the village of its supplies or give them any reason to suspect her. "Some friends of mine are supposed to meet up with me, but I'm beginning to think that they're lost." The woman gives her a suspicious look, but shakes her head. "Not now, we don't. Our messenger hawks are all out to the other towns nearby." "Oh." Katara does her best to look innocent. "Is that who's been helping rebuild here?" "You must think pretty highly of people." There is a brief pause, then the woman adds, "No, it's been weeks and we've heard nothing." She doesn't believe that for a second. There has to be someone else here. Someone had to dig that well. Someone had to decide that the haphazard rehanging of doors and shutters was a worthwhile effort, while the village was still desperate for food. "The Fire Lord himself only saw fit to send us one scrawny kid." The woman stares straight ahead as she marches to another house and hands the tarps off to a waiting man. Her tone softens just a bit. "Between the boy and whatever's been happening at night, we're scraping by." Katara nods. If she has anything to do with it, they'll be standing on their own feet before much time passes. The boy, whoever he is, must be determined to do the same. "He had a messenger hawk come by today," the woman adds. "Already sent it off empty, though. Not that we could have given over an imperial hawk for a message to your friends if we wanted to." It takes all of Katara's will to keep from asking the boy's name, or whether she can see him. It's too great a risk. Whoever he is, he's from the capital, which means that he has ties to the Fire Lord, which means that he might have heard of Katara and her friends, which means that no matter how much good he's done here, he's still a danger to Katara. She wants to know who he is, but she'll have to investigate more carefully. When the regular messenger hawks are back, could I use one of them to send my letter? I have money. The woman scrutinizes her. If you can wait, I suppose. At this rate, we'll have everything rebuilt before they come back. But, she pauses to give Katara a stern look. If anyone here needs the hawks, your friends will have to wait. Of course. She doesn't actually have a message to send, so of course she doesn't mind. I suppose you'll be wanting someone to alert you when they're free again? Katara shakes her head. The last thing she needs is for someone to find her camp full of Water Tribe tools and clothing, to say nothing of Appa and Momo. No thank you. If I don't hear from my friends, I'll stop by and check for myself. She excuses herself and tries not to be bothered by the long, suspicious look that follows her as she makes her way back toward the edge of town. Part of her still burns to check the house with the crooked door, but she doesn't dare. Not now. Not with people watching her, and especially not now that she knows he's from the capital. Maybe tonight. Maybe when it's dark and she has the benefit of her disguise and the mist to conceal her, she'll be able to take that chance. The feeling of eyes on her back doesn't subside when she's out of sight of the village, but she tells herself that it's just the same creeping paranoia that haunts her at night. That the prospect of meeting the boy who the Fire Lord sent to the village has gotten into her head and scared her. Besides, she hasn't slept yet, and tiredness never helps these things. When she's back at camp, she rubs Appa's belly and scratches Momo behind the ears, then crawls into her tent, still trying to ignore the feeling that she's being watched. She's going to figure out what's going on in the village tonight, and before she can do that, she will need her rest.